My name is Nia. I am 34 years old, and I run a highly successful luxury real estate and staging company in Prince George County, Maryland. 6 days after I underwent a grueling spinal fusion surgery, I received a text message from my husband Marcus. It read, "This Saturday, all 15 members of my family are staying at our house for 2 weeks." I was lying in bed trapped inside a rigid medical back brace. The incision on my spine was still fresh and occasionally bleeding through the bandages. I could barely walk to the bathroom without assistance. I grabbed my phone and replied, "I just had major surgery. Please postpone it until next weekend. I need time to heal." I watched the typing bubble appear on the screen. Marcus replied coldly, "No one is waiting. Just do as I say." He did not care about my pain. He only cared about showing off to his relatives. But what he did not know was that by the end of their stay, his entire family would be standing on the curb with their luggage and a police escort. Before I tell you how I reclaimed my peace and my property, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to set ruthless boundaries with toxic in-laws. The days leading up to that Saturday were a blur of physical agony and emotional dread. Marcus was 36 years old and worked as a credit appraiser, but he carried himself like a billionaire. He loved the prestige of my success but resented me for earning it. I had purchased our luxury penthouse before we even got married. I paid the mortgage, I covered the utilities, and I bought the custom velvet chairs and imported chandeliers that made the place look like a magazine cover. Marcus just lived there, driving a leased Mercedes he could barely afford so he could flex on his fraternity brothers and his family. I was the financial backbone of our marriage, but in his mind, he was the king of the castle. On the morning of their arrival, I forced myself out of bed. Every movement sent a sharp electric shock of pain shooting down my legs. The doctors had warned me that spinal fusion recovery was brutal and required absolute rest. I managed to put on a loose silk robe over my back brace, hiding the thick medical straps beneath the expensive fabric. I slowly made my way to the living room, taking careful, measured steps. I lowered myself into my favorite accent chair, gritting my teeth against the intense throbbing in my lower back. I just wanted to rest in the quiet of my own home. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, the peace was shattered. The doorbell did not just ring. It buzzed repeatedly in a loud, obnoxious pattern. Marcus practically sprinted to the door, his chest puffed out, ready to play the role of the generous, wealthy provider. When he swung the heavy mahogany door open, the noise hit me like a physical blow. 15 people poured into my entryway, all talking over each other, laughing and shouting. They did not bother to wipe their shoes. They dragged heavy plastic suitcases with broken wheels directly over my pristine hardwood floors, leaving deep scratches in the finish. Cousins, aunts, and uncles swarmed into my living room, dropping duffel bags onto my expensive white sofas. The sheer volume of people in my carefully curated space was suffocating. No one looked my way. No one asked how my surgery went. No one offered a gentle hug or a word of sympathy for the fact that I was clearly in immense physical distress. Then came the matriarch. Odessa, my mother-in-law, marched through the front door like she owned the building. She is 60 years old, but carries the bitter, judgmental energy of someone who has spent her entire life finding faults in other women. She wore a bright, patterned dress and carried a knockoff designer handbag that she immediately dropped right onto my antique Persian rug. She did not greet her son. She did not say hello to me. Odessa stood in the center of my entryway, placed her hands on her hips, and slowly looked up at the vaulted ceilings. She squinted her eyes and let out a loud, theatrical sigh. "Look at those corners," she announced, her voice echoing off the walls so everyone could hear. "There are cobwebs up there." She turned her sharp gaze toward me, sitting frozen in my chair. "You have been home from the hospital all week, Nia. Are you just laying around doing nothing while my son works his fingers to the bone to provide for you?" The audacity of her statement left me breathless. I was literally wearing a medical brace to keep my spine from collapsing. My company paid for the very roof over her head. Marcus had never provided a single dime toward this property. Yet here she was, standing in the home my blood, sweat, and tears had bought, treating me like a lazy servant who had failed to complete her chores. I looked at Marcus, expecting him to defend me. I expected him to remind his mother that I had just undergone major spinal surgery and needed rest. Instead, Marcus just chuckled nervously and rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at me with a warning glare, silently demanding that I keep my mouth shut and play along. "You know how it is, Mom," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "She has been taking it easy, but we will get this place cleaned up for you." I gripped the armrests of my chair, my knuckles turning white. The physical pain radiating from my spine was entirely eclipsed by the burning betrayal in my chest. My own husband was throwing me under the bus to appease his toxic mother. The rest of the family continued to unpack their belongings carelessly, tossing coats over my delicate staging furniture and loudly claiming which bedrooms they wanted. They were treating my private sanctuary like a cheap motel, and Marcus was handing them the keys. Odessa took a few steps closer to me, looking down her nose. "A good wife keeps a clean house no matter what," she muttered loudly enough for the cousins to hear. "In my day, women had babies in the fields and went right back to work. A little backache is no excuse to let a home fall into disrepair. I hope you plan on cooking tonight because we traveled a long way and we expect a proper hot meal." I stared back at her, my expression completely blank. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I just sat there absorbing the profound disrespect vibrating through the room. They thought I was weak because I was injured. They thought my silence meant submission. They thought they could invade my home, disregard my health, and walk all over me without facing any consequences. But as I watched them scatter their luggage across my beautiful home, a cold, calculating clarity washed over me. I realized that my marriage was not just toxic. It was a parasitic arrangement designed to drain my resources and break my spirit. Marcus was never going to protect me from his family because he was exactly like them. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I knew right then and there that I was not going to argue with them. I was not going to beg for basic human decency. I was going to let them get entirely comfortable in my house, and then I was going to legally and ruthlessly remove every single one of them from my life. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the restrictive tightness of the medical brace against my ribs. Every inhale was a reminder of my physical vulnerability. The room was spinning slightly from the strong pain medication I had taken earlier that morning, but my mind was sharpening by the second. I watched Marcus lead his uncles toward the kitchen, loudly offering them top-shelf liquor that I had purchased for client gifts. He was pouring my expensive scotch into glasses, acting like the benevolent host of a mansion he did not own. The cousins were already turning up the volume on the television, drowning out my thoughts with the blaring sounds of a sports game. Children were running down the hallways, their heavy footsteps echoing through the penthouse. My beautiful, quiet sanctuary had been transformed into a chaotic nightmare within a matter of minutes. Odessa was still standing nearby, expecting me to apologize for the imaginary cobwebs and promise to cook a feast for her sprawling family. She thrived on making other women feel small. I finally broke my silence. I looked directly into Odessa's judgmental eyes. My voice was calm, low, and completely devoid of emotion. "I will not be cooking tonight," I said simply. "I am recovering from surgery and I need to rest. Please make yourselves comfortable with whatever Marcus provides." Odessa's mouth dropped open in shock. She was not used to being told no. She turned to Marcus, her face twisting with indignation, ready to complain about my lack of hospitality. Marcus immediately shot me a furious glare, his ego bruised in front of his family. He marched over to me, his heavy footsteps vibrating through the floorboards and sending fresh waves of agony up my spine. The real nightmare was only just beginning, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Before Marcus could formulate a response to my refusal, the heavy oak front door swung open again. In walked Jamal, Marcus's younger brother, followed closely by his wife Brittany. Brittany was holding a massive iced matcha latte in one hand and her phone in the other, completely ignoring the fact that she was stepping onto my pristine hardwood floors with muddy designer sneakers. She dragged 3 enormous hard-shell suitcases across the threshold, letting them bang loudly against the doorframe. Brittany had always possessed a profound sense of entitlement, the kind of weaponized obliviousness that allowed her to make outrageous demands while wearing a sweet, innocent smile. She looked around the chaotic living room, completely bypassing any basic greeting, and locked her eyes directly on me. "Naya, babe, perfect timing," Brittany chirped, pointing a manicured finger at the mountain of luggage she had just dragged inside. "Do you mind running these up to the second floor for me? Jamal has a bad shoulder from playing golf last week, and I absolutely cannot lift anything heavy right now." I sat there in my accent chair, staring at her in sheer disbelief. I was visibly wearing a thick, rigid medical brace that wrapped around my entire torso. The straps were thick and bulky, protruding from underneath my silk robe. Anyone with eyes could see that I was practically immobilized. "I just had spinal fusion surgery 6 days ago, Brittany." I said, my voice steady but laced with warning. "I am not carrying your bags up a flight of stairs." Brittany let out a dramatic, breathy sigh and rolled her eyes, shifting her weight to one hip. "Oh, come on, Nia. I know you strong black women can handle absolutely anything. You always push through. Just take them up slowly so you do not scratch the paint on the walls. I really need to get unpacked. Also, what is the plan for dinner? Jamal said you were doing all the cooking for this trip." "I am strictly doing keto and organic farm to table right now. Please tell me you did not just buy regular vegetables from the discount store. My digestion is super sensitive." The sheer audacity of her microaggressions hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She had just walked into the home that I paid for, demanded that I act as her personal bellhop, despite my fresh surgical wounds, and then had the nerve to dictate a specialized menu for me to cook. I turned my gaze away from her and looked directly at Jamal, who was busy scrolling through his phone, pretending not to hear his wife treating me like the hired help. "Jamal!" I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous icy register. "Your wife seems to have lost her mind. You know exactly what medical procedure I just went through. Pick up your own luggage and carry it up my stairs. And if she wants an organic keto meal, she can download an app and order it herself." Jamal finally looked up from his phone, his face twisting into an ugly scowl. He turned to Marcus, shaking his head in exaggerated disbelief. "Bro, are you really going to stand there and let your wife disrespect us like this? We just drove 4 hours to get here, and she is giving us an attitude about a couple of bags and some dinner." That was the trigger. Marcus's fragile ego could not handle being questioned by his younger brother. He needed to assert his dominance. He needed to prove to his family that he was the absolute ruler of this household, even though my bank accounts funded his entire reality. Marcus marched across the room. He did not say a word. He grabbed me by the upper arm, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to bruise, but positioned perfectly so no one else in the room could see the physical force he was applying. He yanked me upward. A blinding flash of agony shot down my sciatic nerve, radiating from my surgical incision all the way down to my feet. I gasped, stumbling slightly, but Marcus did not care. He forcefully steered me out of the living room, down the short hallway, and shoved me into the walk-in kitchen pantry. The heavy pantry door clicked shut behind us, cutting off the noise of the invading relatives. The lighting inside was dim, illuminating the tight, claustrophobic space. I was trapped between rows of canned goods and the towering presence of my husband. His chest was heaving. He smelled of cheap cologne and nervous sweat. Marcus backed me up against the wooden shelving. He reached into the pocket of his jeans, pulled out a crumpled, long piece of paper, and aggressively shoved it against my chest. I flinched as the paper fluttered down and landed on the floor between my feet. I looked down. It was a grocery receipt from an ultra-premium supermarket downtown. The total at the bottom was circled heavily in red ink, $1,200. "You are going to pay this right now," Marcus hissed, leaning in so close I could feel the heat of his angry breath on my face. "I already put it on my credit card, and my statement cuts tomorrow. I bought the premium steaks, the imported seafood, all the organic garbage Brittany wants, and the top-shelf liquor for my uncles. You are going to transfer those funds to my checking account immediately. And then you are going to get your lazy self into that kitchen and start prepping the marinades." I stared at him, my mind operating with a cold, terrifying clarity. This was the reality of my marriage. He was weaponizing my income to build his own patriarchal facade. He was using the money I bled for to buy his family's respect to play the role of the ultimate provider while simultaneously abusing the actual provider behind closed doors. You spent $1,200 of money you do not have to impress people who do not even respect you. I whispered, my voice dripping with venomous pity. I am not paying a single dime of that bill, and I am certainly not cooking for your disrespectful mother or your entitled sister-in-law. Marcus slammed his hand against the wooden shelf right next to my head. The loud crack made me flinch, sending another jolt of pain through my healing spine. You listen to me, he growled, his eyes wide and frantic. I am the man of this house. When my family comes to town, we show them respect. You make enough money to cover this without even blinking. Do not stand here and act like you are broke just to spite my mother. You are going to transfer the money, and you are going to smile while you serve my family their plates. If you embarrass me in front of them again, Nia, I swear you will regret it. I had to grip the edge of the pantry shelf to stay standing. My physical vulnerability was terrifying. If he decided to push me, my spine could literally shatter. But while my body was broken, my mind was absolute ice. I realized in that dark, cramped pantry that he did not just want my money. He demanded my total submission to validate his fragile masculinity. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked down at the receipt on the floor, then slowly raised my eyes to meet his desperate, angry stare. You maxed out your credit card for a barbecue, I said, spacing out every word so the humiliation could sink deep into his skin. You are pathetic. His face contorted with rage. His hand twitched, a reflexive urge to strike me, but he caught himself. He knew better than to leave a visible mark on my face. Instead, he kicked the receipt across the floor so it hit my shoe. Transfer the money by tonight, Marcus sneered, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. Or I will log into the joint account and cancel the payment for your physical therapy appointments. Let us see how fast you heal when you cannot afford your medical care. With that final cowardly threat, he turned around and pushed the pantry door open. Instantly, his entire demeanor transformed. The abusive, desperate man vanished, replaced by the jovial, generous host. Who is ready for a drink? His voice boomed cheerfully down the hallway as he rejoined his family. I got the good stuff for us. I was left alone in the dim pantry. My legs were shaking from the pain of standing too long. I slowly bent my knees, keeping my spine perfectly straight, fighting back tears of sheer physical agony. I reached down and picked up the crumpled receipt. I smoothed the paper out against my thigh. This was no longer just a grocery bill. It was a receipt for his financial abuse. It was evidence. I carefully folded the paper and slid it into the deep pocket of my silk robe. I knew exactly what I had to do next. The war had officially started, and I was going to make sure he lost everything. What would you do if your partner threatened to cancel your medical care just to fund their family vacation? Let me know in the comments. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my silk robe over my rigid medical brace. I walked out of that dim pantry not as a defeated wife, but as a woman preparing for absolute war. The living room was already unrecognizable. The television was blaring a football game, and empty beer bottles were multiplying on my imported marble coffee table. I ignored them all, focusing only on the agonizing climb up the floating glass staircase to my master's suite. The pain medication was wearing off. My spine felt like it was grinding against shattered glass. I needed to lie flat on my prescribed mattress before my legs gave out completely. I pushed open the heavy double doors to my bedroom, expecting the cool, quiet sanctuary I had meticulously designed. Instead, I found Odessa standing right in the middle of my custom walk-in closet. She was holding one of my expensive silk blouses against her chest and examining her reflection in my full-length mirror. She did not even flinch when I walked in. She simply tossed the delicate blouse carelessly onto a velvet ottoman and stepped out into the main bedroom area, rubbing her right knee with a highly theatrical grimace. This house is way too big, she complained, not bothering to make eye contact with me. These stairs are murder on my joints. I am a senior citizen, Nia. I cannot be expected to sleep in that cramped guest room at the end of the hall. The mattress feels like pure concrete. I need space to stretch out, and this room gets the best morning light. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity. My master suite was not just a bedroom, it was my temporary staging headquarters. Because I was recovering from spinal fusion surgery, my home office downstairs was completely inaccessible to me. I had moved my drafting table, my fabric swatches, and my expensive 3D rendering equipment into the corner of the master suite so I could work from bed. This room held my medical supplies, my heating pads, and the custom $15,000 ergonomic mattress my surgeon had specifically prescribed for my recovery. "You cannot sleep in here," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "This is my bedroom. All my medical equipment is in here. The guest rooms have premium mattresses and ensuite bathrooms. You will be perfectly comfortable down the hall." Before Odessa could unleash her fake outrage, Marcus marched into the room. He had followed me upstairs, clearly anticipating a confrontation and eager to play the hero for his mother. Without a single word of greeting or a question about my pain levels, he immediately sided against me. "Do not be selfish, Naya," he snapped, walking right past me. "Mom has bad arthritis. She needs the adjustable bed. You can sleep downstairs on the sofa. It is closer to the kitchen anyway, so you can start cooking tonight without walking up and down the stairs." He did not wait for my response. He walked straight over to my staging corner and grabbed my high-end drafting tablet. He ripped the charging cord out of the wall, sending a stack of expensive fabric swatches crashing to the hardwood floor. "What are you doing?" I demanded, stepping forward. A sharp spike of pain radiated from my spine, forcing me to stop and grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. Marcus ignored me completely. I watched him move like a wrecking ball through my personal space. He carried my drafting tablet and my laptop out into the hallway and carelessly dropped them onto the floor. He marched back into the room, grabbed my heavy baskets of staging props, my architectural magazines, and my personal skincare products from the vanity. He threw them out into the hallway one by one like he was taking out the trash. I stood in the doorway, physically trapped by the thick medical brace digging into my ribs. Looking down at my shaking hands and my bare feet surrounded by my scattered belongings, I felt the full weight of my vulnerability. Anyone looking down at this scene from above would see a woman trapped inside a plastic shell, struggling just to breathe while her husband towered over her, things tossing her livelihood aside with casual, ruthless cruelty. He was systematically dismantling my safe space right in front of my eyes. "Marcus." "I am 6 days post-op," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of physical agony and absolute rage. "I need this bed for my spine. If I sleep on that living room sofa, I could tear my stitches and end up back in the hospital." He did not care. He grabbed my silk pillows and shoved them hard into my arms. "You are exaggerating," he scoffed. "Black women are built tough. You will be fine on the sofa. Stop acting like a spoiled princess and show some respect to the woman who gave birth to me." Odessa smiled a wicked, triumphant smile as she kicked off her shoes and immediately lay back on my expensive sheets. "See," she purred, adjusting the duvet over her legs. "A good daughter-in-law knows her proper place. Just close the door on your way out, Nia. The draft from the hallway is bothering my joints." Marcus turned to his mother, his chest puffed out with that ridiculous fake pride. "Anything you need, Mom," he said loudly enough for his brother downstairs to hear. "My house is your house. We have plenty of space." Nia does not mind roughing it for a few days. She knows family comes first. I watched him perform this grotesque theater of the generous son. He was playing the wealthy provider, using the assets I bled for to buy his mother's affection. He was handing over a sanctuary he did not pay a single cent for, just to maintain his image. I gripped the doorframe tighter, fighting the urge to scream. My spine felt like it was on fire. Every nerve ending in my lower back was screaming for me to lie down on the firm support of my prescribed mattress. The living room sofa he was banishing me to was a low-profile, mid-century modern piece I had bought for staging a sleek, beautiful piece of furniture with absolutely zero back support. Sleeping on it would be pure torture. "Marcus," I said, forcing him to look at me. "The mortgage on this house is paid from my business account. This mattress your mother is currently putting her dirty feet on was paid for by my staging company. You do not get to evict me from my own bedroom so you can play the big man of the house." Odessa shot up from the pillows, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Listen to how she talks to you, Marcus," she sneered, pointing a crooked finger at me. This is what happens when you marry a woman who thinks her paycheck makes her a man. She has no respect for you, no respect for the natural order of things. In a real Christian home, the man is the head of the household regardless of who brings home the bacon. You need to put your wife in check before she embarrasses you in front of the whole family. Her words hit his deepest insecurity with pinpoint accuracy. Marcus tightened his jaw. The mask of the jovial host slipped, revealing the petty, fragile tyrant underneath. He marched up to me, his face inches from mine. "Get your stuff and get downstairs," he demanded through gritted teeth. "I am not going to let you disrespect my mother under my roof." My roof. The delusion was staggering. He was so desperate to maintain his illusion of control that he was willing to physically break his recovering wife to do it. He reached out and shoved my remaining medical supplies, a box of sterile bandages, and my prescription pain medications into my arms. The box slipped from my weak grasp and crashed to the floor, pills scattering across the polished wood. Neither of them moved to help me. Marcus simply stepped over the mess, grabbing the heavy brass handles of the double doors. "Take a hint, Nia," he said coldly. "The adults are trying to rest." He slammed the heavy master bedroom doors right in my face. The loud click of the lock echoed in the hallway. I stood there alone in the corridor, surrounded by my expensive staging equipment, my scattered pills, and my tossed clothing. The pain in my back was blinding, but the clarity in my mind was absolute. They had just stolen my sanctuary. They had chosen to inflict physical suffering on me for the sake of their own comfort and ego. I slowly bent my knees, keeping my spine perfectly rigid to pick up my scattered pain medication. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was for victims. I was simply a property owner dealing with a massive pest infestation, and it was time to prepare the extermination. Clutching the plastic bottle of painkillers in my trembling hand, I gathered my silk pillows and blankets from the hallway floor. Every step toward the floating glass staircase felt like wading through thick, wet cement. My spine throbbed with a relentless burning ache, but I refused to let my legs buckle or my posture falter. I carefully descended the steps, my hand gripping the cold metal railing so tightly my knuckles ached. I was preparing to enter a war zone, and I needed to project absolute invulnerability. The living room was a theater of male entitlement. Marcus stood by the marble kitchen island, holding court with a glass of my premium imported bourbon in his hand. Jamal sat sprawled across my custom white sofa, his muddy sneakers resting dangerously close to the delicate upholstery. When they saw me slowly descending the stairs, carrying my bedding like a banished servant, Marcus let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. He thought he had won. He genuinely believed that my physical descent mirrored a psychological surrender. "There she is," Marcus announced, gesturing toward me with his glass so his cousins could hear. "I told you she would come to her senses. A good wife always knows when to step back and let the family settle in." I did not say a word as I dropped my pillows onto the low-profile mid-century modern sofa. The piece of furniture was an expensive staging prop, beautiful to look at, but completely devoid of back support. I stood beside it, catching my breath, the rigid medical brace digging sharply into my ribs. "Now that you are down here," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with suffocating condescension, "go ahead and get those steaks started. Jamal and the boys are hungry. You can rest your back on that sofa after we eat." I turned to face him. The lingering effects of the anesthesia and the blinding physical pain were entirely burned away by the sheer heat of my fury. "I am not cooking your food, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the noise of the television and the chatter of the relatives in the background. "And I am not your maid." Marcus slammed his heavy crystal glass down on the marble island. The sharp, aggressive clink made Jamal sit up instantly, sensing the volatile shift in the atmosphere. "Watch your tone when you speak to me in front of my family," Marcus barked, taking 2 aggressive steps toward me. "I told you upstairs, you are not going to disrespect me in my own house. Your house." The words tore from my throat before I could stop them. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh that stopped the surrounding cousins dead in their tracks. The fast, overlapping dialogue began to fly, snapping back and forth across the room like a physical whip. "Yes, my house." Marcus stepped closer, pointing a rigid finger at my chest. I am the head of this family. You are a fraud, I snapped back, looking him dead in the eye and refusing to flinch. You do not own a single brick of this property. My LLC bought this penthouse 2 years before I even let you move in. I pay the mortgage. I pay the exorbitant property taxes. I pay the HOA fees while you strut around playing the wealthy provider for an audience of freeloaders. Shut your mouth, Nia, Marcus warned, his face turning a dangerous shade of ash. No, let us tell your family the truth, I raised my voice, ensuring every single person in that open-concept living room could hear my exact words. Let us talk about that matte black Mercedes parked downstairs. The one you post on Instagram every Sunday morning outside of megachurch with the hashtags blessed and boss moves. Should we tell Jamal that it is a lease? Should we tell him you are 3 months behind on the payments and the dealership is threatening to repossess it? I had to transfer $3,000 from my business account just last week so you could avoid the repo man dragging it out of our driveway. Marcus lunged forward, his hands balled into tight fists, but Jamal jumped up from the sofa and stepped between us, throwing his hands up. My eyes darted rapidly between my husband's humiliated, rage-filled face and his younger brother's defensive posture. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Whoa, hold on, Nia, Jamal interjected, puffing out his chest to shield his older brother. You do not need to emasculate your husband like that. Marcus is the eldest. He carries the weight of this whole family. A man is a man regardless of who writes the check. You need to learn your place and stop tearing him down. My place! I turned my glare directly onto Jamal, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. Do not stand in my living room and lecture me about my place. You want to talk about carrying the weight of the family. You want to talk about the black tax. Jamal crossed his arms, leaning heavily into his misguided sense of traditional authority. Yeah, I do. Marcus looks out for all of us. He is the pillar. You, as his wife, should be lifting him up, making sure he looks good, not keeping score of every dollar like a bitter, unsupportive woman. It is about respect. Our parents raised us to lead. He is not leading anyone, I fired back, pointing directly at Marcus, who was visibly shrinking behind his brother's defense. He is financially bleeding me dry to fund your collective delusions. That black tax you all love to talk about, that cultural duty to lift up your community and your family, that is supposed to be about shared struggle and mutual elevation. It is not supposed to be a free pass for a grown man to act like a parasite just to maintain his fragile ego. You think Marcus gave you that $10,000 loan for your failed trucking business last year? He did not. He cried to me for 2 weeks until I pulled it from my hard-earned savings, so you would not have to file for bankruptcy. Jamal's jaw dropped open. He snapped his head to look at Marcus, betrayal washing over his features. You said that money was from your quarterly bonus. He lied, I stated coldly, snapping the attention back to me. He lies to all of you to build his ego. He takes my money, slaps his name on it, and plays the king of the castle. You all sit around talking about traditional gender roles, demanding submissive women who cook and clean and bow down to the man of the house so his masculinity stays intact. But traditional men actually provide. Traditional men do not steal from their wives' medical funds to buy top-shelf liquor for a pool party. You want a traditional wife, Marcus, earn her. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The television continued to hum in the background with the sounds of a sports game, but no one moved. The cousins standing near the kitchen island were staring at the floor, suddenly incredibly interested in their shoes. Brittany had peeked out from the hallway, her mouth zipped shut for once. Marcus looked like he had been physically gutted. His entire carefully curated persona had just been ripped to shreds in front of the very people he desperately wanted to impress. You are going to regret saying that, Marcus whispered, his voice shaking with a terrifying quiet fury. You just crossed a line you cannot uncross. The line was crossed when you threw me out of my own bed 6 days after spinal surgery, I replied, my voice perfectly steady, betraying none of the immense physical pain radiating through my back. Jamal, clearly humiliated by the public revelation of his business loans, scowled at me. You are just a cold, arrogant woman. Marcus deserves better than a wife who throws her money in his face. And you deserve a brother who does not lie to you, I retorted smoothly. But I guess we all have to settle for reality today. I did not wait for another response. The rapid-fire argument had drained the absolute last reserves of my physical strength. My legs were trembling so violently I thought I might collapse right there on the rug. I slowly turned my back on both of them, a deliberate display of profound disrespect. I lowered myself onto the staging sofa, gritting my teeth, as the flat, unyielding cushions pressed harshly against my surgical brace. I lay down carefully, adjusting my legs, and pulled my silk blanket up to my chin. I turned my face toward the back of the sofa, completely shutting them out. I could hear Marcus breathing heavily behind me. I could hear Jamal muttering under his breath about disrespectful modern women. But they did not touch me. The absolute public humiliation I had just delivered had paralyzed them. They were stripped of their illusions, left to stand in the wreckage of Marcus's fake wealth. As I lay there staring at the textured fabric of the sofa, I knew this was only the beginning. I had wounded his pride, which meant he would undoubtedly retaliate. He would try to take something from me to restore his fragile ego. But my trap was already being set. While they spent the next few days indulging in their toxic delusions, I would be quietly locking the doors to their reality. Let them have the living room. Let them have the master suite. Soon, they would not even have a sidewalk to stand on. The hours dragged on like a slow, agonizing crawl through broken glass. I remained perfectly still on that rigid staging sofa, facing the large floor-to-ceiling windows, while the chaotic reality of my hijacked home swirled behind me. My silence was my ultimate weapon, but to Marcus and his family, it looked exactly like submission. They genuinely believed my quiet retreat was a white flag. They thought my physical limitations meant my spirit had finally broken under the combined weight of their collective entitlement and toxic expectations. I could hear them in the kitchen celebrating their perceived victory. The familiar clinking of my imported crystal glasses echoed down the hallway, accompanied by loud, boisterous laughter. Marcus was holding court again, his voice booming with the artificial bravado of a man who thought he had successfully put his wife back in her place. He was pouring generous amounts of the top-shelf bourbon I had purchased for a corporate client event, handing out my hard-earned assets like they were his own personal party favors. I heard Jamal hyping him up, reinforcing the dangerous narrative that true manhood meant breaking a woman down until she handed over her wallet without question. "You really handled that, bro." Jamal slurred slightly, his words echoing off the marble countertops. She was getting way out of line. You have to nip that modern independent woman attitude in the bud before they think they run the show. She will be apologizing tomorrow morning once she realizes how cold it gets down here by herself. Marcus chuckled, a deep rumbling sound of pure, unchecked arrogance. Sometimes you just have to remind them who actually runs things, he replied, his tone dripping with unearned superiority. She will be fine by morning. She always bounces back when she realizes she needs this family to validate her. She talks a big game about her money, but at the end of the day, she is terrified of being alone. The sheer magnitude of his delusion was almost laughable. I did not need his family. I was the financial host feeding their entire parasitic ecosystem, but I let them talk. I lay there in the fading evening light, controlling my breathing to manage the sharp stabbing pains radiating from my surgical incision. Every time I shifted my weight, the thick Velcro straps of my medical brace dug mercilessly into my bruised skin. But the physical agony was absolutely nothing compared to the cold, calculating energy coursing through my veins. I was not a defeated wife sulking in the dark. I was a predator lying in wait. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the living room, the house transformed into a playground for the invaders. I heard the heavy thud of footsteps upstairs as Odessa and Brittany settled into my luxurious master suite. They had successfully claimed my sanctuary, and they were not going to be quiet about it. I heard Brittany complaining loudly about the brand of organic shampoo in my ensuite bathroom, claiming it lacked the proper essential oils for her hair type. I heard Odessa ordering Marcus to march back up the stairs and bring her fresh towels, because the Egyptian cotton ones hanging on the heated rack were simply not fluffy enough for her liking. They were systematically tearing through my personal space, violating every boundary I had ever established, while treating my husband like an obedient errand boy. and he was doing it with a smile. Around 9 o'clock, the harsh overhead living room lights flicked off, leaving me completely engulfed in the darkness. The golden glow from the street lamps outside illuminated the dust motes dancing in the silent air. Heavy footsteps approached the sofa. I kept my eyes gently closed, feigning deep, exhausted sleep. But my senses were hyper-focused, tracking every single movement in the room. It was Odessa. She paused right beside the edge of the sofa. I could smell the heavy, suffocating scent of her cheap floral perfume mixed with the expensive lotion she had just stolen from my vanity. She stood there for a long moment, simply looking down at me. I could feel her smug, immense satisfaction radiating like heat from a furnace. "I told you, Brittany," she whispered loudly enough for her daughter-in-law to hear from the base of the glass staircase. "You just have to break their spirit early. These career women think their little business degrees make them special, but at the end of the day, they all end up sleeping on the couch if they forget how to serve their men. A smart man knows how to break a stubborn horse." Brittany let out a soft, condescending giggle, letting her heavy footsteps join Odessa's near my head. "It is honestly embarrassing," she whispered back, her voice laced with racial microaggressions she barely tried to hide. "I would never let Jamal treat me like that. But then again, I know how to be a real supportive wife. She probably deserves this for acting so aggressive and superior all the time. Good night, Nia. Sweet dreams on that cheap sofa." They turned and walked away, their footsteps retreating up the stairs to enjoy the $15,000 mattress my business had paid for. I slowly opened my eyes. The living room was perfectly silent now, except for the low, rhythmic hum of the smart refrigerator in the kitchen. The shadows wrapped around my immobilized body, offering a cool, protective cloak. I did not move a single muscle. I just stared straight ahead into the darkness, my vision easily adjusting to the lack of light. They thought they had won. They thought this was the definitive end of the story. A stubborn, independent woman finally put in her proper place by the unified force of traditional family values and patriarchal dominance. They were sleeping in my beds, eating my premium food, and planning to spend my money, completely convinced that my temporary physical weakness equaled a permanent, devastating loss of power. What they completely failed to realize was that I was an absolute expert in staging. I made my living by carefully arranging environments to create a highly specific illusion. I knew exactly how to make a room look incredibly inviting while completely hiding the fatal structural flaws underneath the surface. Right now, I was staging my own surrender. I was giving them the exact illusion they desperately needed to see. The submissive, broken wife banished to the dark corner of the house. I slowly reached into the deep pocket of my silk robe and pulled out my smartphone. The screen brightness was already turned all the way down to prevent any glow from alerting them. I ignored the intense throbbing pain in my fused spine and carefully propped myself up against the stiff, unforgiving armrest. I opened the secure encrypted application that controlled the entire smart home system. Months before my surgery, I had installed discrete high-definition staging cameras throughout the common areas of the penthouse. They were primarily designed to capture lighting changes and spatial flow for my luxury interior design portfolio. Marcus knew they existed, but he was far too arrogant and technologically oblivious to realize they captured crystal-clear, high-fidelity audio as well. I tapped the screen, activating the night vision lenses in the kitchen, the dining room, and the main upstairs hallway. I watched the live feeds pop up on my screen. The house was fully secure. The trap was perfectly set. My in-laws were deeply asleep in the luxurious bedrooms I had painstakingly furnished, dreaming of the money they planned to extract from my business accounts tomorrow morning. They had absolutely no idea that their cruel gloating, their aggressive financial threats, and their physical intimidation were already being recorded, uploaded, and archived to a secure cloud server. I opened a new message window and drafted an urgent, high-priority email to my corporate attorney. The subject line was incredibly simple: expedite the LLC property transfer immediately. I typed out the strict instructions with rapid, precise keystrokes, outlining the exact legal maneuvers required to completely isolate the penthouse from any potential marital assets. I authorized the immediate release of the necessary security deposits for the private luxury recovery facility I had been quietly researching for weeks. I was not just planning to pack a bag and leave. I was meticulously planning to pull the entire concrete foundation out from under their feet. I hit send. The tiny swoosh sound of the email departing felt like a starting pistol firing in the dark. I locked my phone and slid it safely back into my robe pocket. I carefully lay back down on the unforgiving cushions, staring straight up at the vaulted ceiling. The physical pain was still there, a constant dull roar in my lower back, but it was entirely manageable now. It was the pure, unadulterated fuel I needed to keep my mind razor sharp. The camera slowly pulls back, drifting smoothly away from the staging sofa and retreating deep into the shadows of the hallway. It captures the stark, glaring contrast of the scene. The lavish, breathtakingly expensive penthouse, and the injured woman banished to the dark, lonely corner. But as the shot widens, framing my silhouette against the faint streetlight pouring through the massive windows, there is absolutely no defeat in my posture. My eyes are wide open, completely dry and burning with a cold, terrifying calculation. I was perfectly content to let them enjoy their stolen master suite for the night. They were going to need the rest, because tomorrow I was going to burn their entire fraudulent reality to the absolute ground. The darkness of the living room offered no physical comfort. Every passing hour felt like a physical weight pressing down on my fragile spine. The staging sofa was a masterpiece of mid-century aesthetic and an absolute nightmare for a woman recovering from a spinal fusion. The thin layer of foam padding pushed relentlessly against my titanium screws and healing bone. I focused on my breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds, exhale for 6. I refused to reach for the remaining pain medication. I needed my mind sharp, completely unfiltered by narcotics for what was about to happen. Around 2 in the morning, the heavy silence of the penthouse was broken by the faint clinking of glass and the muffled murmur of hushed voices. It was not coming from the guest bedrooms or my stolen master suite. The sounds were drifting down from the massive open-concept kitchen just around the corner. They thought I was deeply asleep, knocked out by the heavy painkillers they had seen me scatter across the hallway floor. They assumed the darkness of the living room was a void that swallowed my presence entirely. I slowly slipped my hand under the silk blanket and retrieved my iPad. The device felt heavy in my weakened grip, but I managed to prop it against my rigid medical brace. I swiped the screen, bypassing the lock code with a silent tap. The sudden burst of blue light illuminated the dark corner of the sofa. The camera lens captures an over-the-shoulder shot, looking directly past my shoulder at the glowing iPad screen. It slowly transitions into a tight, intimate close-up of my eyes. The cold blue glare from the screen reflects perfectly in my pupils, highlighting the absolute lack of surprise and the dangerous calculating focus burning within them. I opened the secure staging application. The dashboard loaded instantly, displaying a grid of high-definition camera feeds from every common area in the penthouse. I bypassed the dark hallways and tapped directly on the kitchen feed. The video expanded to fill the entire screen in crisp 4K resolution. The audio activated a second later, transmitting their hushed conspiratorial voices directly into my earpiece. Marcus, Odessa, and Brittany were gathered around my white marble kitchen island. The scene was sickeningly comfortable. Marcus was pouring himself another glass of my imported bourbon, the bottle now dangerously low. Odessa sat on one of the velvet bar stools draped in one of my expensive cashmere throw blankets, picking at a plate of artisanal cheeses and cured meats I had ordered for a potential client closing. Brittany stood leaning against the commercial-grade refrigerator, scrolling through her phone while sipping sparkling water. They looked like a family plotting a corporate takeover, entirely comfortable in the castle they had just stormed. "I still cannot believe she actually stayed down there," Brittany whispered, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh. "I honestly thought she would put up more of a fight. Jamal was worried she was going to call the cops when Marcus grabbed her." Marcus leaned against the marble counter, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He flashed that arrogant, empty smile that had fooled me for 5 long years. "Nia barks loudly, but she has no bite. She cares way too much about her professional reputation to involve the police. Imagine the scandal if her wealthy clients found out her own husband had to put her in her place." She will swallow her pride to protect her image. She always does. Odessa took a slow, deliberate bite of aged Gouda. She wiped her mouth with a linen napkin, her face twisted into an expression of profound satisfaction. You handled her perfectly tonight, son. I raised a strong black man who knows how to govern his household. These modern girls make a little bit of money, and suddenly they forget the biblical order of things. A woman is meant to be a helpmeet, not a dictator. It is your job to remind her that all this wealth means absolutely nothing if her husband is not respected. Exactly, Mom, Marcus agreed, taking a long sip of his bourbon. She thinks because her name is on the company door, she dictates the family rules. But she forgets who keeps her grounded. Without me, she is just a lonely, bitter workaholic. I provide the family structure she desperately craves. I provide the social standing at church. She pays the bills because that is her role in this partnership. My role is to lead. The sheer level of delusion radiating from the iPad screen was almost physically nauseating. He genuinely believed that his presence, his empty posturing, and his fake church boy persona were somehow equal in value to my relentless hustle, my financial acumen, and the multi-million-dollar business I had built from the ground up. He viewed my wealth as his birthright, a divine compensation for his sheer existence. Brittany set her glass down on the counter, making a soft clinking sound that the high-fidelity microphones picked up perfectly. Well, she definitely needs an attitude adjustment. The way she talked to Jamal tonight was completely unacceptable. But honestly, Marcus, we cannot stay in this hostile environment for 2 weeks. The tension is terrible for my digestion. Jamal and I have our own business crisis to deal with back home. We really need to know if your plan is actually going to work. I stopped breathing. The pain in my spine vanished completely, overridden by a sudden electric surge of adrenaline. My eyes darted across the glowing screen, locking onto Marcus's face. Plan? What plan? Odessa leaned forward, her voice dropping to an even lower conspiratorial whisper. Brittany is right, Marcus. You told us to pack our bags and come up here because the money was guaranteed. You promised Jamal that his trucking business would be saved by Friday. Your brother is facing bankruptcy in less than a month. We played our part today. We put Nia in her place and secured the house. Now you need to deliver. Marcus held up his free hand, a gesture of absolute control. Relax, Mom. Everything is already in motion. Why do you think I needed her isolated downstairs? Why do you think I pushed so hard to get control of the master suite? My heart hammered against my ribs, pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my medical brace. I increased the volume on my iPad, pressing the earpiece deeper into my ear. I did not want to miss a single syllable. I needed her out of that bedroom because she keeps her secure filing cabinet in the walk-in closet. Marcus continued, a sickeningly proud smirk spreading across his face. She thinks she is so smart keeping her corporate documents locked away, but she leaves the spare key hidden inside her velvet jewelry box. I found it 3 days ago while she was still in the hospital. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over me. The secure filing cabinet. That was where I kept the physical copies of my LLC formation documents, my social security cards, my passport, and the original deed to the penthouse. It was the nerve center of my entire financial existence. Brittany crossed her arms, looking impatient. Okay, so you have her paperwork. How does that help Jamal and me get the cash we need by Friday? Marcus took another sip of his drink, savoring the moment, relishing the attention and the power he held over his desperate family members. He leaned closer to his mother and sister-in-law, his voice dripping with venomous greed. Because Brittany, my dear wife, has impeccable credit and a massive amount of equity in this penthouse. Marcus whispered, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. And since she is currently incapacitated and heavily medicated, she is in no position to notice a few extra documents being processed. I stared at the iPad screen, my breath caught in my throat, as the reality of his betrayal slammed into me with the force of a freight train. He was not just a lazy, entitled husband trying to flex for his relatives. He was not just a toxic narcissist trying to break my spirit. Marcus was actively orchestrating a massive, calculated financial crime right under my nose. He was planning to steal the very foundation of my life to fund his family's failures. I kept my eyes locked on his face, the blue light of the screen illuminating the cold, silent fury settling deep into my bones. The trap was no longer just about kicking them out. It was about absolute total annihilation. The video feed on my iPad split my reality in two. On the bright glowing half of the screen, Marcus stood in the center of my kitchen, pouring another expensive measure of bourbon. On the other side, in the pitch black of my living room, I lay perfectly still, recording every single frame. My breathing slowed. The blinding pain in my spine faded into a dull, distant hum. I was no longer a recovering patient. I was a CEO witnessing corporate espionage and calculating the exact legal destruction of the perpetrators. Brittany leaned across the marble island, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. You are actually processing a loan. How is that even possible, Marcus? Her name is on the deed. Her company owns the property. You cannot just walk into a bank and ask for cash. Marcus laughed, a deeply patronizing sound that echoed through the high-fidelity microphone and directly into my ear. You think I am stupid, Brittany. I am not walking into a traditional bank. I went through a private online equity lender. They deal with high-value properties and fast cash disbursements. They do not require an in-person appraisal if the property value is heavily documented, which Nias is. I found her digital signature files on her backup hard drive. I copied the exact vector image of her signature and applied it to the e-sign documents. He took a long, arrogant sip of his drink. I submitted the application for a second mortgage 3 days ago, while she was still drugged up in the hospital. $250,000 drawn against the equity of this penthouse. My blood turned to absolute ice. $250,000. He was leveraging $250,000 of my hard-earned equity to fund his pathetic lifestyle and bail out his brother. Jamal is going to get $100,000 by Friday morning. Marcus continued, his chest puffed out as he played the ultimate savior. That will pay off his commercial trucking debts and keep his business afloat. I am taking another 100 for myself to clear the remaining balance on the Mercedes and wipe out those credit cards Nia keeps whining about. The rest is going straight to you, Mom, for that kitchen remodel you wanted back in Baltimore. Odessa clapped her hands together, a sickening display of maternal pride. She reached out and patted Marcus on the cheek. You are a good son, Marcus. You are a provider, just like a man should be. Do not let anyone tell you this is wrong. You are entitled to that money. You put up with that woman's constant disrespect. You manage this household. Under the law of marriage, what is hers is yours. You are just taking the compensation you are rightfully owed for dealing with her arrogant attitude. I stared at the screen, my face completely devoid of emotion. The split screen of my reality was violently jarring. In the kitchen, they were raising their crystal glasses, toasting to my financial ruin. Downstairs, I was silently taking screenshots, capturing timestamps, and downloading the entire audio and video feed to an encrypted offshore cloud server. Brittany swirled her sparkling water, a massive smile breaking across her face. Jamal has been so stressed about the business, Marcus. We were literally looking at bankruptcy next month. I cannot believe you pulled this off. But what happens when she finds out? What happens when the first mortgage statement arrives in the mail? Marcus waved his hand dismissively. By the time the first statement arrives, the money will already be distributed and spent. What is she going to do? Call the police on her own husband, send her brother-in-law to jail. She will throw a massive fit, she will yell, she will threaten divorce, but she will eventually pay it off to protect her pristine corporate reputation. She cares way too much about her perfect image to let a messy public fraud case hit the news. She will just work a few more weekends to cover the monthly payments. She is a workhorse, Brittany. That is what she is built for. The sheer sociopathic calculation in his voice was breathtaking. He had planned every single detail of my reaction. He had banked his entire felony on my supposed fear of public embarrassment. He truly believed my ambition and my desire for peace would make me a willing, compliant victim. He thought I would quietly absorb $250,000 in fraudulent debt just to avoid a scandal. I minimized the camera application for a brief second, keeping the audio running in the background. I opened my primary email account and quickly navigated to my credit monitoring service. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard with ruthless precision. I pulled up my latest credit report. There it was. A hard inquiry filed 3 days ago by a private online equity group. The application was in processing. He was not bluffing. He had actually committed wire fraud, identity theft, and mortgage fraud. I switched back to the live camera feed. Marcus was wiping the marble counter with a towel, playing the responsible homeowner. The funds are scheduled to hit the joint checking account by Thursday afternoon, Marcus assured them. Once the wire clears, I will immediately transfer Jamal's cut to his business account and send Mom her share. We just have to keep Nia comfortable and isolated down here until Friday. Keep her stressed about the little things like cooking and cleaning so she does not check her emails or look at her bank apps. Keep her exhausted. Odessa nodded sharply, her eyes gleaming with malice. I will make sure she stays busy tomorrow. She needs to understand that her place is serving this family. I will have her reorganizing the entire pantry. If her back hurts, she can take another pill. It will keep her out of our way. I stopped recording. I had captured 25 minutes of raw, unedited, high-definition footage. I had a crystal-clear audio confession of a $250,000 federal crime. I had the complete breakdown of the conspiracy, the distribution plan, and the malicious intent to keep me physically suffering to hide their tracks. I locked the iPad and let the screen go completely dark. The sudden absence of the blue light swallowed me back into the shadows of the living room. I lay flat on the rigid staging sofa, staring up at the dark ceiling. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a single ounce of heartbreak. The woman who loved Marcus, the woman who wanted a family, the woman who thought her marriage was just going through a rough patch, died right there on that couch. In her place, a cold calculating machine woke up. Marcus had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought my success was a product of my fear of failure. He thought my wealth was a result of me being a mindless, obedient workhorse. He completely failed to understand that the same ruthless aggression it took for a black woman to build a luxury real estate empire from absolutely nothing was the exact same ruthless aggression I was about to unleash on him. I did not care about a public scandal. I did not care about keeping up appearances for the church or my clients. I cared about absolute total destruction. I reached for my phone in the dark. I bypassed the standard email app and opened a secure messaging portal I used for highly confidential real estate transactions. I drafted a message to my corporate attorney, a man known in Maryland for being legally terrifying. Marcus just committed federal mortgage fraud. I have the video confession. He forged my digital signature for a $250,000 loan. The funds are scheduled to deposit into the joint account on Thursday. Do not block the deposit. Let the wire clear. I want the federal crime completed so he cannot claim it was just a mistake. Prepare the FBI tip-off and draft the immediate eviction notices for 15 people. I want them out on Friday. I hit send. Upstairs, I could hear the faint sounds of them walking back to their stolen bedrooms, laughing and whispering about their incoming wealth. I closed my eyes and let the silence of the room wash over me. The pain in my spine was still there, but it felt different now. It felt like armor. They were planning to keep me exhausted and isolated for the next 4 days. They had no idea that I was going to use those 4 days to lock every single door, burn the house down, and hand them the ashes. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a harsh, unforgiving light across the living room. I had not slept a single minute. My mind had been racing, calculating every legal maneuver, every financial counterstrike, every precise step required to execute my plan. I carefully pushed myself up from the rigid staging sofa. The physical pain in my lower back was a sharp, biting reality, but it felt entirely secondary to the cold determination anchoring my spirit. I strapped my heavy medical brace tightly around my torso, securing the Velcro with a loud, definitive rip. I draped a floor-length emerald green silk robe over my shoulders, tying the sash tightly. It was not just clothing, it was armor. I made my way toward the kitchen, leaning heavily on my cane. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of minimalist peace and imported lavender candles, smelled aggressively of cheap bacon grease and spilled beer. The marble countertops were littered with unwashed pans and sticky glasses. Brittany was standing at my kitchen island, humming a cheerful, off-key tune. She was wearing expensive designer yoga pants and a matching sports bra, looking completely refreshed after sleeping in one of my premium guest beds. She had pulled out my professional-grade blender and was tossing handfuls of my organic blueberry spinach and expensive protein powder into the pitcher. She hit the blend button, filling the open concept space with a deafening grinding roar. Odessa was lounging at the dining table, filing her nails and ignoring the mess completely. Marcus was nowhere to be seen, likely still upstairs enjoying the $15,000 mattress he had stolen from me. Brittany poured her thick, vibrant purple smoothie into a tall glass. She did not use a lid. She turned around, holding the glass loosely in one hand, and began walking directly across the main living space. She bypassed the tiled walkway entirely and headed straight for the center of the room. My eyes instantly locked onto her path. She was walking directly over my prized antique Persian rug. It was a hand-knotted masterpiece, imported directly from Istanbul, a $10,000 investment piece I had purchased to celebrate my very first $1 million commercial staging contract. It was woven with delicate ivory and silver silk threads, a piece of art that anchored the entire aesthetic of the room. Brittany stopped right in the dead center of the rug. She looked directly at me. Her eyes locked with mine and her lips curled into a tiny malicious smile. Her fingers simply opened. The heavy glass slipped from her hand. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl. My vision tracked the fall perfectly, like a camera dropping low to the floor for a dramatic tracking shot. I watched the glass hit the floor with a sharp, heavy thud. It did not shatter, but the impact sent a massive, violent splash of thick purple sludge erupting across the delicate ivory silk. I watched the dark, staining blueberry liquid seep rapidly, irreversibly deep into the ancient, irreplaceable threads of the rug. My gaze panned slowly upward, traveling up Brittany's designer athletic wear, past her perfectly manicured nails, stopping dead on her face. She wore a smug, utterly unapologetic smirk. It was a look of pure, calculated vandalism. "Oops," Brittany gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in a grotesque display of fake shock. "Oh my gosh, Nia, I am just so clumsy today." My hand completely slipped. She looked down at the massive spreading purple stain, then back up at me, her eyes gleaming with wicked satisfaction. "You had better get some club soda and a heavy scrub brush on that right away before it sets permanently. Blueberry stains are just the worst to get out of light fabrics. With your back being so stiff, you should probably get down on your hands and knees and blot it very carefully. You really do not want to ruin such a pretty little rug." From the dining table, Odessa let out a harsh, approving cackle. She did not even look up from filing her nails. "A woman who knows how to properly keep her house would already have the cleaning supplies out and a towel in her hand," Odessa announced to the room. "If you let your home turn into a pigsty, you only have yourself to blame." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the moment hung in the air. The white sister-in-law had intentionally destroyed a $10,000 piece of art in my home and was now ordering me, a black woman recovering from spinal surgery, to get on my hands and knees and scrub the floor for her amusement. It was a power play designed to humiliate me, to physically break me down, and to assert her absolute dominance in my space. I looked at the ruined rug. I looked at Brittany's triumphant face. I did not flinch. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear over the destroyed silk. I simply reached into the deep pocket of my emerald robe and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen and dialed a number I knew by heart. I held the phone to my ear, my posture perfectly straight despite the shooting pain in my spine. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice smooth, loud, and echoing with crisp professional authority. "I have an urgent job at the penthouse. I need your premium crew here within the hour." "Yes, expedited premium service. Bring the laser equipment and the digital cameras. Bill the entire consultation directly to my corporate account." I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Brittany let out a loud, condescending laugh, shaking her head as she stepped carefully over the purple puddle. Calling a professional cleaning crew for a spilled drink, she mocked, walking back to the kitchen to grab a paper towel for her hands. "You really love throwing Marcus's money away, do you not?" You are so desperate to look rich, you cannot even clean your own floors. No wonder he is so stressed out all the time. I just smiled at her. It was a cold, empty, terrifying smile. Some messes require absolute professionals to remove permanently, I said softly. An hour later, the heavy brass doorbell chimed through the penthouse. Marcus had finally wandered downstairs and was lounging on the patio with his phone. Jamal walked over and pulled the front door open. 3 men stepped into my entryway. They were not wearing janitorial uniforms or carrying scrub brushes. They were dressed in immaculate tailored charcoal suits. They carried leather portfolios, laser measurement devices, and high-end DSLR cameras with wide-angle lenses. Brittany walked by the entryway holding a fresh green juice she had just blended. She looked the men up and down, letting out another obnoxious laugh. "Wow, you really called the fancy cleaners," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "They wear expensive suits now to scrub floors. Just make sure you get the stain completely out of the rug, boys. My sister-in-law is very picky about her things." She turned and walked out to the patio to join Marcus, completely dismissing them. The men ignored her entirely. They were not here to clean a rug. They were senior commercial real estate appraisers from one of the most elite high-stakes brokerage firms on the East Coast. Richard, the lead appraiser, stepped forward and extended his hand to me. "Ms. Anderson, we received your expedited request. We canceled our morning appointments to be here. We are fully prepared to conduct the fast-track valuation for the property." I shook his hand firmly, my emerald robe trailing elegantly behind me. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Richard," I said. "We need the final numbers by tomorrow morning. My international buyer is anxious to close the deal, and they are paying in full in cash." I guided the team of appraisers through my home. I pointed out the custom crown molding, the imported marble countertops, the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the smart home integration systems. We walked right past the massive purple blueberry stain on the Persian rug. I completely ignored it, and Richard, being a consummate professional, did not ask a single question about it. His team worked with ruthless, silent efficiency. They shot high-definition photos of the living space. They used their laser tools to measure the exact square footage of the dining room, while Odessa sat on the sofa watching daytime television, completely oblivious to the fact that her surroundings were being itemized for sale. We moved to the second floor. I led them straight to the master suite. The door was ajar. I pushed it open to reveal Odessa's open suitcases, her cheap floral perfume lingering in the air, and her clothes scattered across my $15,000 mattress. The appraisers stepped inside their cameras, clicking rapidly, capturing the exact dimensions of the custom walk-in closet where Marcus had stolen my secure documents just days prior. Downstairs, the family continued to gorge themselves on my premium food. They laughed loudly on the patio, staining my floors, mocking my phone calls, and enjoying their stolen luxury. They were blissfully, arrogantly unaware of the reality unfolding right in front of their eyes. They thought I was weak. They thought they had broken my spirit with a spilled smoothie and a few cruel words. They had absolutely no idea that I was casually giving a guided tour to the men who were pricing the very roof over their heads. I was finalizing the exact square footage of the property they were about to be permanently, legally, and ruthlessly evicted from. The countdown had officially begun, and they were wasting their final hours making a mess they would never have the chance to clean up. The mid-afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the private rooftop terrace of my penthouse. The heavy booming bass of a hip-hop track vibrated through the reinforced glass doors, rattling the imported crystal chandeliers in the living room below. Marcus had decided that my first week recovering from major spinal fusion surgery was the absolute perfect time to host a massive impromptu pool party. He had invited half of his university alumni fraternity chapter, a loud, boisterous group of grown men who swarmed my custom infinity pool like it was a cheap public beach club. They were splashing chlorinated water over the limestone edge, dropping soaking wet towels onto my imported teakwood lounge chairs, and completely taking over the sprawling outdoor space. Marcus stood at the very center of the chaos, wearing designer swim trunks he had undoubtedly purchased with my money, holding a freshly lit premium cigar. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime for his brothers, loudly boasting about his aggressive real estate investments, the massive square footage of his penthouse, and his incredible, entirely fabricated success in the financial sector. He played the role of the self-made king flawlessly, while the actual owner of the castle was locked away nursing a surgically repaired spine. Brittany was sprawled across my favorite shaded cabana bed, taking endless selfies with her oversized sunglasses, twisting her body to make sure the panoramic view of Prince George County was perfectly framed in her background. Odessa sat comfortably under a large canvas umbrella, holding court with a few of Marcus's older fraternity brothers. She was proudly detailing how her son had always been destined for immense wealth and how he was the true pillar of their family. They were feasting on the illusion of my success, gorging themselves on a lifestyle they had not earned a single fraction of. Waiters wearing crisp white aprons were weaving through the crowded terrace, carrying heavy silver platters of jumbo shrimp, cocktail Wagyu beef sliders, and glasses of top-shelf liquor. It was an incredibly expensive, highly coordinated catered event. The scene cuts hard and fast away from the blinding sun and the deafening, chaotic bass. It snaps directly into the cool, absolute silence of my locked staging office down the hall. The heavy, soundproof oak door muted the wild frat party outside to a faint, distant, rhythmic thud. I sat perfectly straight in an ergonomic black leather executive chair, my medical brace tightly secured around my torso, my emerald silk robe draped neatly over my shoulders. I was completely removed from their circus, staring intently at the glowing screen of my laptop. I had managed to secure this small office before Marcus could claim it for his guests, locking the deadbolt and pulling the blackout blinds. It was my quiet, freezing cold war room. My smartphone buzzed sharply against the glass surface of the desk. A high-priority push notification flashed across the screen. It was an automated fraud alert from American Express. I picked up the phone, my eyes scanning the text with rapid precision. A charge of $2,450 had just been authorized at a premium local catering company. A second alert popped up immediately after the first. $820 at an exclusive, high-end liquor distributor. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and opened my personal leather wallet. The designated corporate platinum card I used exclusively for high-end staging acquisitions and international furniture imports was missing from its slot. Marcus had not just stolen my master bedroom and raided my secure financial documents. He had physically gone into my private wallet, stolen my corporate credit card, and used it to fund his ridiculous ego-driven frat party on my terrace. He was feeding his fraternity brothers dry-aged steak and imported cognac on my absolute dime, knowing perfectly well that I was locked in a room just a few feet away, bleeding through my surgical bandages. He assumed I was too physically weak to check my banking applications or too intimidated by his loud, aggressive friends to march out there and humiliate him in public. He thought he had completely neutralized me. He thought I was subdued. I tapped the screen of my phone, opening the detailed transaction log. He had not even tried to hide the charges. He had simply swiped the card and forged my signature on the catering receipt. It was yet another blatant, undeniable, easily traceable felony. First, he attempted federal mortgage fraud, and now he was committing corporate credit card theft and forgery across state lines. He was eagerly handing me the heavy iron nails for his own coffin, one fraudulent transaction at a time. I pulled up the security camera feeds on my laptop monitor. I zoomed in on the high-definition terrace feed. Marcus was laughing loudly, clapping one of his fraternity brothers hard on the back, and gesturing broadly to a private chef who was currently carving a massive smoking tomahawk steak on a portable outdoor grill. Marcus pointed to the lavish spread, taking absolute credit for the feast. The sheer suffocating arrogance of the man was almost fascinating to watch. He was building a fragile house of cards directly on top of a live landmine, completely unaware that my finger was already resting firmly on the detonator. I did not storm out onto the terrace. I did not scream at the hired caterers or snatch the expensive liquor bottles out of his hands. A lesser woman, a woman driven by raw, uncalculated emotion, would have burst through those glass doors and caused a massive, screaming public scene. She would have given him the exact angry black woman stereotype he wanted to project to his friends. But I was not a reality television character. I was a corporate CEO. I dealt in massive leverage, meticulous documentation, and total unrecoverable destruction. I took high-resolution screenshots of the American Express alerts. I logged into the catering company's digital portal and downloaded the itemized receipts that bore his forged version of my signature. I saved the security footage of Marcus, handing my physical platinum credit card to the catering manager on the terrace. I compiled all of it into a new heavily encrypted folder on my desktop labeled Exhibit B. I then forwarded the entire comprehensive file directly to my corporate attorney, attaching a brief ice-cold message. Add corporate credit card theft and signature forgery to the federal file. Do not freeze the card yet. Let him keep spending. Let him dig this hole as deep as he possibly can. The more he steals today, the less he will be able to deny tomorrow in front of a judge. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, carefully adjusting the stiff medical straps around my ribs. The sharp physical pain was a constant biting reminder of my physical vulnerability, but the absolute psychological control I held over the situation was an incredible numbing anesthetic. Out there on the sun-drenched terrace, Marcus was a king holding court surrounded by his loyal subjects and his adoring parasitic family. He was the highly successful man providing a life of ultimate luxury, living the absolute dream. But in the quiet, freezing sanctuary of my locked office, I was the silent architect of his impending, inescapable nightmare. I watched the video feed as Brittany approached Marcus, laughing and holding up her empty crystal glass for a refill of my expensive champagne. Odessa was smiling proudly at her son, nodding approvingly at his display of wealth. They were all entirely complicit in this grand toxic illusion. They were celebrating a victory they had not won, spending money they did not earn inside a home they would not possess for much longer. I simply watched the screen, my face a mask of absolute calm, waiting patiently for the hammer to fall. I closed the security camera application on my laptop and slowly pushed my ergonomic chair away from the desk. The heavy soundproof door of my office kept the blaring bass of the music at bay, but I needed to see this specific performance with my own two eyes. I walked over to the tinted floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling outdoor terrace. From this elevated vantage point, I had a perfect unobstructed view of the entire gathering while remaining completely invisible behind the dark reflective glass. Down below, the chaotic energy of the pool party was suddenly shifting. Marcus was standing at the very edge of the infinity pool, holding a crystal champagne flute high in the air. He tapped a silver fork against the delicate glass. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the chatter, and the catering staff quickly moved to turn down the heavy bass of the outdoor speakers. His fraternity brothers turned their attention toward him. Jamal stepped up to his right side, beaming with unearned pride. Odessa and Brittany moved to the front of the crowd, looking up at Marcus like he was a conquering hero returning from battle. If a camera were to slowly zoom in through that tinted glass, perfectly framing Marcus in slow motion, it would capture the absolute epitome of a fraudulent king. He stood tall, his chest puffed out the afternoon sun, catching the expensive gold watch on his wrist, a watch I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary. "Thank you all for coming out today," Marcus boomed, his voice echoing across the terrace. "I wanted to bring my brothers and my family together to celebrate life, to celebrate success, and to celebrate Black excellence right here in Prince George County." The fraternity brothers erupted into cheers, raising their expensive glasses of stolen liquor. Marcus soaked up the applause, letting it wash over him before holding up his hand to quiet the crowd. He was milking every single second of this fabricated glory. "We all know what it takes to make it in this world." Marcus continued, his tone shifting into a smooth, rehearsed cadence of a motivational speaker. "We talk a lot about generational wealth. We talk about breaking curses and building empires. But none of that matters if you do not take care of your own blood first. As the eldest son, it has always been my duty to carry the weight. When my brother Jamal told me his business was struggling, I did not hesitate. I told him, 'I have got you covered, bro.' Because that is what we do. We elevate each other." He gestured grandly toward Odessa, who was wiping a fake tear from her eye. "And to my beautiful mother who sacrificed everything for us, I promised you that one day you would never have to worry about a single bill again. I promised you the luxury you deserve. Look around you, Mom. We made it. This is your house just as much as it is mine. The sheer audacity of his speech was physically revolting. He was actively weaponizing the concept of the black tax, twisting a cultural narrative of communal support and shared struggle into a self-serving monologue to stroke his own massive ego. He was taking credit for the sanctuary I had bled to build. He was claiming ownership of a financial bailout he was currently funding by committing federal mortgage fraud against his own bedridden wife. He was standing on my marble terrace drinking my imported champagne, claiming my multi-million-dollar real estate assets as his own personal achievement. "And what about Nia?" one of the fraternity brothers yelled out playfully from the back of the crowd. "Where is the lady of the house hiding today?" Marcus did not even flinch. His smile remained perfectly fixed, painted on his face like a cheap plastic mask. "Nia is resting upstairs." He lied smoothly, his voice dripping with fake husbandly concern. "She is recovering from a minor procedure, so she is taking it easy today. But she knows her husband has everything completely under control down here. She knows she does not have to lift a finger because I handle the heavy lifting for this family. Let us raise a glass to a beautiful home, to strong family bonds, and to securing the bag." The crowd cheered loudly, clinking their glasses together in a toast to a man who was nothing more than an empty suit. I stood behind the tinted glass, my posture perfectly rigid inside my medical brace. I did not tap on the window. I did not open the door and expose his massive web of lies. I simply watched the slow-motion car crash of his ego. I watched him drink the champagne he stole from me. I watched him bask in the adoration of a family that only loved him for the money he was actively stealing. I turned away from the window and walked slowly back to my desk. The physical pain in my spine was a dull roar now, completely overshadowed by the intense, hyper-focused clarity in my mind. I sat down in my leather executive chair and woke up my laptop screen. While Marcus was outside playing the ultimate provider, I was inside doing the actual heavy lifting. I opened my secure banking dashboard. I navigated to the joint checking account, the one Marcus assumed I was too exhausted and medicated to check. There it was. Sitting in the pending transactions queue was a massive incoming wire transfer. $250,000. The fraudulent second mortgage he had initiated 3 days ago was in the final stages of clearing. The funds were locked in a holding pattern scheduled to be fully accessible by Thursday afternoon. Marcus thought he had brilliantly outsmarted the system. He thought he had timed the theft perfectly, waiting until I was physically incapacitated to forge my digital signature and drain the equity from my premarital asset. He planned to immediately distribute those funds to Jamal in Odessa before I ever saw a single paper statement in the mail. I clicked on the transaction details, expanding the routing information and the origination codes. I took high-resolution screenshots of the pending wire transfer. I cross-referenced the incoming funds with the digital forgery alerts I had already compiled in my encrypted folder. I was building a pristine, airtight chain of evidence that no defense attorney in the state of Maryland could ever dismantle. He wanted to be the provider. He wanted to carry the weight of his family. I was going to let him carry the full weight of a federal indictment. I closed the banking portal and opened my private client contact list. The frat party outside was reaching a fever pitch, the music growing louder, the laughter becoming more obnoxious. They were celebrating their absolute victory in my home. But the real transaction, the one that was going to fundamentally alter the course of all our lives, was about to happen right here in the freezing silence of my locked office. I scrolled down to a specific international number. It was time to introduce Marcus and his parasitic family to a level of wealth and power they could not even begin to comprehend. I clicked the call button, ready to speak to a man who bought multi-million-dollar properties the way Marcus bought stolen bottles of liquor. The ringing tone echoed softly in the quiet confines of my office. 3 rings later, the screen blinked and the high-definition video feed connected. Tariq Al-Fayed appeared on my monitor, sitting in a brilliantly lit corporate office in Dubai. Tariq was a billionaire real estate developer and a notoriously aggressive international investor. He had previously contracted my firm to stage 4 luxury commercial properties in the Washington metropolitan area. He respected me immensely because I delivered flawless high-end results ahead of schedule and under budget. He knew I did not waste time, and I knew he possessed the liquid capital to make immediate financial moves. Tariq smiled warmly as his face filled my screen. Nia, my absolute favorite designer. He greeted, his voice carrying a crisp professional tone. To what do I owe the pleasure of a secure call at this hour? I maintained my perfectly composed professional demeanor, entirely ignoring the throbbing pain radiating from my fused spine. Tariq, I have an exclusive off-market opportunity that requires absolute discretion and a highly expedited cash transaction. I know your holding company has been looking to expand its premium residential portfolio in the Maryland area. I am offering you my own primary residence. It is a custom-renovated penthouse, fully furnished, turnkey condition, and staged with imported designer pieces. I shared my screen, granting him direct access to the secure, high-resolution virtual tour files I had compiled just an hour ago with the elite appraisal team. Tariq watched his screen intently, his eyes darting across the meticulous architectural details of the property. He observed the imported marble countertops, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline, and the custom infinity pool where my husband was currently throwing his pathetic frat party. Tariq knew the exact value of my professional staging, and he was intimately familiar with the skyrocketing market value of this specific neighborhood. I want 20% above the current market appraisal. I stated, my voice unwavering and completely devoid of emotion. In exchange, you get the property exactly as it stands, fully furnished, down to the custom silk drapes, the integrated smart home technology, and the original artwork. I require a wire transfer in full by tomorrow morning, and the title transfer happens today. I am selling the entire LLC that holds the deed, which completely bypasses all traditional escrow delays. Tariq leaned back in his heavy leather executive chair, steepling his fingers. He did not haggle. He did not question my motives or ask why I was abandoning my custom home so suddenly. Wealthy men who operate at that elite level only care about the quality of the asset and the speed of the transaction. He recognized a highly lucrative deal being handed to him on a silver platter. If the LLC is completely clean and the title is unencumbered, we have a deal, Nia, he said decisively. Send the digital contracts to my legal team. I immediately conferenced in my corporate attorney, creating a secure three-way digital workspace. My lawyer had already prepared the asset transfer documents, anticipating my command. The absolute beauty of my meticulous financial foresight was unfolding perfectly right in front of my eyes. Because I had purchased this penthouse through a single-member, limited liability company, established 3 full years before I even met Marcus, his name existed nowhere on the property records. In the state of Maryland, assets acquired prior to marriage and maintained without commingling marital funds remain absolute separate property. Marcus had zero legal claim to the house. He had never contributed a single dollar to the mortgage or the property taxes. He was essentially just a long-term guest who was about to aggressively overstay his welcome. As my attorney calmly walked Tariq's elite legal team through the digital disclosures, a sudden burst of loud, obnoxious laughter erupted from the terrace right outside my window. The heavy, booming bass of the hip-hop music vibrated violently against the glass pane. Marcus and his fraternity brothers were taking expensive tequila shots, cheering and toasting to a lavish lifestyle they could never actually afford. My toxic in-laws were gorging themselves on my premium food and happily plotting my financial ruin, completely oblivious to the fact that I was currently liquidating the very ground beneath their dancing feet. They thought they had successfully trapped me in a dark corner. In reality, they had simply locked themselves inside a burning building while I held the only fire extinguisher. The secure portal on my laptop pinged sharply. The final closing documents appeared on my screen, awaiting my verified digital signature. I read through the heavy legal jargon with razor-sharp focus. The permanent transfer of the LLC ownership, the immediate relinquishment of all property rights, the strict terms of the international cash wire transfer. Everything was perfectly and ruthlessly structured. My attorney had even included a specific non-negotiable clause granting me temporary medical tenancy for 72 hours to ensure my safe transition to a private luxury recovery facility. I was protecting my healing spine while simultaneously severing every financial tie to the man who tried to break it. The camera begins a slow, continuous circular tracking shot. It revolves smoothly around my heavy oak desk, capturing the stark dramatic contrast between the bright glowing laptop screen and the dark freezing shadows of my locked office. As the camera glides behind me, it perfectly frames my straight, rigid posture, wrapped tightly in the thick medical brace. The shot continues to circle, catching the sharp, dangerous, and utterly determined focus in my eyes. The ambient, chaotic noise of the pool party outside slowly fades away into total silence, leaving only the crisp, authoritative clicks of my wireless mouse echoing in the room. I clicked on the first signature line, my verified digital signature stamped perfectly in black ink onto the digital page. I scrolled down smoothly, applying my initials to the transfer of the deed, the release of the luxury furnishings, and the permanent waiver of all future claims. Each click was a definitive, devastating strike against Marcus and his parasitic family. They desperately wanted to steal $250,000 from my equity. I was legally stripping them of a multi-million-dollar sanctuary in less than 30 minutes. I reached the very final page of the extensive contract. The submit button pulsed in bright solid green at the bottom of the monitor. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. I did not feel a single ounce of sentimental regret for the home I had built. A house is just a structure made of glass and stone, but my peace of mind was absolutely priceless. I brought my finger down on the mouse and clicked send. The screen flashed a large, bold confirmation message, document successfully executed. Tariq smiled a genuine, respectful smile through the video feed. A true pleasure doing business with you as always, Nia. The funds will be securely routed to your designated corporate offshore account by dawn. I will have my local Maryland property manager contact you directly regarding the final key handover and the security transition. I thanked him graciously and ended the call. The video feed vanished, leaving only my desktop background illuminating the dark room. I sat back heavily against my ergonomic chair, letting the absolute magnitude of the moment wash over my tired body. The penthouse was officially sold. The massive transaction was legally binding and completely irreversible. Marcus was no longer standing on my terrace holding court as the king of his castle. He was currently trespassing on private property owned by a powerful foreign billionaire. His fraudulent second mortgage application was now tied to a house he never legally owned, and an LLC that was no longer registered under my name. When the online equity bank attempted to process his forged digital documents tomorrow morning, they would immediately flag it as a massive federal crime. They would see a fraudulent loan application submitted against an asset belonging to an international holding company. The trap had slammed completely and violently shut. Marcus had woven a thick, heavy rope of lies, and I had just graciously handed him the absolute perfect place to hang himself. By the time Sunday morning arrived, marking day 6 of their hostile occupation, the atmosphere in my penthouse had shifted from chaotic partying to a heavy, lazy entitlement. The fraternity brothers were gone, leaving behind a trail of sticky floors, broken glasses, and the lingering stench of stale cigars. Only the core family remained deeply and arrogantly settled into my stolen sanctuary. Marcus felt entirely invincible. He truly believed his brutal intimidation tactics had successfully broken my spirit and secured his fraudulent financial future. At precisely 10 in the morning, my locked office door rattled violently. Marcus banged his heavy fist against the solid oak wood. "Nia," he barked through the door. "It is Sunday. My mother expects a full traditional Sunday dinner. Fried chicken, macaroni, and cheese collard greens, the works. Do not embarrass me today. Get down to the kitchen and start cooking right now. I want food on the table by 4 o'clock sharp." I did not reply. I did not need to. I simply picked up my phone and sent a brief, secure text to my personal corporate assistant. Within 2 hours, a highly discreet private catering service delivered a massive, flawless Sunday feast through the restricted service elevator directly into my private staging prep room. I carefully transferred the expensive catered food into my own premium Le Creuset cookware, arranging the massive spread on the kitchen island to look entirely homemade. I was giving Marcus exactly the illusion he demanded. I was meticulously setting the stage for the final act. With the food perfectly arranged and the dining room prepped, I returned to my temporary quarters to prepare my armor. The emerald silk robe had served its purpose during my period of perceived weakness. Today required a completely different aesthetic. I carefully fastened my rigid medical brace around my healing spine, pulling the thick straps tight. Over the bulky brace, I slipped on a pristine, tailored crimson blazer. The heavy, structured fabric of the blazer perfectly concealed the medical equipment underneath. I paired it with crisp, high-waisted black trousers and sleek, pointed toe flats. My hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless bun. I applied a bold, dark red lip. I did not look like a bedridden victim. I looked like a corporate executioner. The camera begins a smooth, deliberate dolly tracking shot, locking onto my profile as I step out of the hallway and begin my descent. It follows me flawlessly down the floating glass staircase, matching my slow, measured, and agonizingly deliberate pace. The tailored crimson blazer cuts a sharp, striking silhouette against the bright open space of the penthouse. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned toward the formal dining room. The heavy mahogany table, a custom piece I had imported directly from Italy, was fully set. The loud, obnoxious chatter of the family died down instantly as I walked into the room. They had expected me to shuffle in wearing sweatpants, looking exhausted, broken, and defeated from hours of slaving over a hot stove. Instead, I glided into the room radiating absolute terrifying power. A wide shot captures the entire grand dining table filled with the arrogant relatives. Odessa sat comfortably on the right side, already digging her fork into a massive portion of baked macaroni and cheese. Brittany and Jamal sat opposite her, whispering to each other and smirking. Marcus sat at the far end of the table, holding a glass of expensive red wine, his face freezing in absolute confusion as he took in my immaculate, powerful appearance. There was one empty chair remaining, the heavy, high-backed armchair at the absolute head of the table. I did not ask for permission. I walked directly to the head of the table, pulled out the heavy chair, and sat down. I kept my spine perfectly rigid against the cushioning, folding my hands neatly on top of the polished mahogany wood. Marcus cleared his throat violently, trying to regain his manufactured authority in front of his audience. "Well," he said, gesturing broadly to the spread of food, "I see you finally decided to act like a real wife and contribute to this family. The food looks decent. It is about time you stepped up and showed my mother some proper respect." Odessa chewed her food loudly, waving her silver fork in my direction. "The greens could use more seasoning," she critiqued with a sour, ungrateful grimace. "But I suppose it is an acceptable effort for a woman who spends all her time focused on a computer screen instead of her household. Let this be a lesson to you, Nia. A clean house and a hot Sunday dinner will keep a man far happier than any corporate title ever could. You need to remember your place." Brittany chimed in immediately, picking at a piece of chicken with exaggerated theatrical distaste. "I thought I specifically asked for organic, gluten-free options, Nia. I really cannot afford to disrupt my gut biome right now, but I guess I will just have to make do with this heavy, greasy southern food." Jamal passed me a napkin. My hands are sticky. I sat at the head of my table, surrounded by parasites gorging themselves on a feast I had secretly orchestrated inside a multi-million-dollar property I had already sold for pure cash. I did not argue with Odessa's toxic, misogynistic criticism. I did not snap at Brittany's blatant racial microaggressions. I did not flinch at Marcus's aggressive patriarchal posturing. I simply looked around the table, making direct, unbroken, and piercing eye contact with every single one of them. And then I smiled. It was a slow, radiant, and utterly chilling smile. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey happily walk directly into a steel bear trap. "Eat up," I said, my voice smooth as silk and echoing clearly in the sudden quiet of the dining room. "Please enjoy every single bite. You all need to gather your strength today. You have a very busy week ahead of you." Marcus frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in deep suspicion. He set his wine glass down with a heavy thud. "What is that supposed to mean?" he demanded, pointing a rigid finger at me. "What busy week?" "Just a figure of speech, Marcus," I replied, my red lips curving into a wider, more dangerous smile. "I just want to make sure my guests are fully satisfied. After all, a Sunday dinner is all about family gratitude and preparing for inevitable changes. You never know what tomorrow might bring." Jamal laughed a loud, oblivious and foolish sound. "See, Marcus? I told you she would fall in line. You just had to show her who the boss is. She knows she cannot survive without this family backing her up. I picked up my crystal water glass and took a slow, elegant sip. My phone, tucked safely inside the inner pocket of my crimson blazer, vibrated silently against my ribs. It was an automated priority alert from my legal team, confirming that the international wire transfer from the Dubai investor had officially cleared my offshore corporate account. The penthouse was fully funded. The title transfer was legally recorded with the county clerk. My net worth had just exponentially increased, while Marcus's fraudulent mortgage application was currently triggering severe federal alarm bells across the banking network. I set my glass down and folded my hands back together on the table. The pain in my spine was completely gone, replaced by a pure, intoxicating rush of adrenaline that sharpened all of my senses. I watched them eat, completely unaware that this was their literal last supper in my kingdom. They were laughing, chewing, and aggressively disrespecting me right up to the bitter end. I maintained my serene, terrifying smile, silently counting down the hours until the entire world crashed down on their heads. The remnants of the lavish Sunday dinner lay scattered across the mahogany table. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his stomach with a look of profound, unearned satisfaction. He had devoured the feast I covertly orchestrated, entirely convinced that his aggressive posturing had forced me into domestic submission. He raised his wine glass, pointing it toward Jamal and Brittany with a boastful smirk. "Make sure you save some room," Marcus announced, his voice booming with the artificial authority of a man playing king. I used the corporate card to order a massive custom red velvet cake from that premium bakery downtown. It cost a small fortune, but like I said, nothing is too good for my family. It should be arriving any minute now. Odessa dabbed the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin, nodding in vigorous approval. "That is what a real provider does," she chimed in, casting a sidelong, triumphant glare in my direction. "He makes sure his family lacks for absolutely nothing." I sat silently at the head of the table, my spine perfectly straight against the chair, the rigid medical brace securely hidden beneath my tailored crimson blazer. I simply offered them another slow, razor-sharp smile. They were gorgeously oblivious, entirely intoxicated by the illusion of their own power. The heavy, resonant chime of the penthouse doorbell echoed through the expansive living room. Marcus slammed his hands down on the table and stood up, puffing out his chest. "That is the delivery now," he declared, strutting past me toward the foyer. "Get the dessert plates ready, Nia. You are going to want to serve this immediately while it is fresh." I did not move a single muscle. I kept my hands folded neatly on the polished wood of the table, listening to the heavy, arrogant thud of his footsteps crossing the imported tile. Marcus swung the massive oak front door wide open, wearing his most condescending, impatient expression, fully expecting to see a delivery driver holding a bakery box. The camera executes a violent, lightning-fast whip pan. It snaps sharply from the open front door directly to Marcus, capturing his jaw, literally dropping open in sheer, unadulterated shock. The camera then whips back just as fast, slamming into a tight-focused close-up on the gleaming silver star pinned to the dark uniform of a Prince George County Sheriff's deputy. There was no cake, there was no delivery driver. Standing on my front porch was a highly coordinated, incredibly intimidating tactical squad. 2 fully uniformed armed sheriff's deputies stood at the front, their hands resting casually near their utility belts. Flanking them was Arthur Sterling, my relentlessly aggressive corporate attorney, wearing an immaculate razor-sharp navy suit and holding a thick, heavy leather portfolio. Standing right beside Arthur was a tall, severe-looking woman with a tight bun and a clipboard, the senior property management representative acting on behalf of Tariq Al-Fayed, the billionaire investor who now owned the very floorboards Marcus was standing on. "Marcus Henderson." The lead deputy asked, his voice a deep, authoritative rumble that instantly sucked all the arrogant air out of the foyer. Marcus blinked rapidly, taking a defensive step backward. His chest deflated. The fake billionaire persona evaporated in a millisecond, replaced by the panicked, stammering reality of a man caught entirely off guard. "Yes," Officer Marcus choked out, his voice cracking slightly. "I am Marcus. I am the homeowner here. Is there some kind of problem? Arthur Sterling stepped forward, his polished dress shoes clicking sharply against the tile. He did not smile. He radiated the kind of cold, lethal corporate power that terrified men like Marcus. Actually, Mr. Henderson, you are not the homeowner, Arthur stated, his voice ringing with absolute chilling clarity. You have never been the homeowner. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, the single-member LLC that held the deed to this property was liquidated in a complete cash transaction to an international holding company. Arthur unclasped his leather portfolio. He pulled out a massive stack of heavily stamped legal documents and aggressively shoved them directly into Marcus's chest. Marcus fumbled, his hands shaking as he grabbed the paperwork to keep it from falling to the floor. The woman with the clipboard stepped forward, her expression entirely devoid of sympathy. I am Ms. Vance, the property manager representing Al Fayed Holdings, she announced crisply. We are here to take immediate total possession of this asset on behalf of the new owner. You are currently trespassing on private internationally owned property. Back in the dining room, the arrogant chatter died instantly. The silence was so profound, you could hear a pin drop. Odessa froze with a forkful of macaroni halfway to her mouth. Brittany gasped, her hands flying to her face. Jamal shot up from his chair, his eyes wide with absolute panic. They had heard every single word echoing down the hallway. Marcus stared wildly at the legal documents in his hands, his eyes darting across the aggressive red stamps and the bold, terrifying legal jargon. This is a mistake, Marcus shouted, his voice rising in sheer panic. He looked frantically at the sheriff's deputies. This is my house. I am married to the owner. This is marital property. You cannot just come in here and kick me out. I have rights. Arthur Sterling let out a short, hollow laugh that held absolutely zero humor. You have fundamentally misunderstood Maryland real estate law. Mr. Henderson, Arthur corrected smoothly. This property was purchased through a private LLC 3 years prior to your marriage. No marital funds were ever commingled. You never contributed a single dollar to the mortgage, the property taxes, or the maintenance. You are legally classified as a non-paying month-to-month tenant at will. Or rather, you were. The lead deputy stepped forward, tapping a heavily gloved finger against the top document in Marcus's shaking hands. That top page is a notice of immediate eviction and a formal trespassing warning, the deputy stated firmly. The new property owners have requested that the premises be vacated immediately so their security teams can secure the asset. You have exactly 30 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. If you are still standing inside these walls at the end of that 30 minutes, you will be placed in handcuffs and formally charged with criminal trespassing. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. The blood had completely drained from his face, leaving a sickly, ashen pallor behind. He turned his head, his eyes wide and terrified, looking down the hallway toward the dining room. He was looking for me. He was desperately searching for the woman he had spent the last 6 days abusing, intimidating, and trying to defraud. I did not make him wait. I pushed my chair back from the head of the table. I stood up, my posture perfectly rigid, the crimson blazer cutting a sharp, lethal silhouette as I stepped out of the dining room. I walked slowly and deliberately down the hallway, the rhythmic click of my pointed toe flats echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock. Odessa, Jamal, and Brittany scrambled out of the dining room, trailing behind me in a panicked, disorganized herd. They crowded into the foyer, their eyes darting wildly between the armed police officers, the ruthless corporate lawyer, and the broken, stammering man they had thought was their wealthy provider. Nia, Marcus pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Nia, tell them this is a mistake. Tell them you did not sell the house. I stopped a few feet away from him. I looked at the armed deputies, I looked at my brilliant attorney, and then I locked my eyes directly onto my soon-to-be ex-husband. There is no mistake, Marcus, I said, my voice resonating with cold, absolute authority. The property is sold. The cash is already sitting in my offshore corporate account. You pushed me out of my own master bedroom. You forced me to sleep on a staging sofa with a fused spine. You stole my corporate credit card to feed your friends. And you thought I was just going to lie there and take it. Odessa pushed her way to the front of the group, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. "You vindictive, arrogant woman," she screamed, pointing her crooked finger at me. "You sold the house out from under your own husband. You are throwing your family out onto the street. God will punish you for this level of disrespect." I slowly turned my head to face my monstrous mother-in-law. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I simply delivered the absolute crushing reality. "You are not my family, Odessa," I stated coldly. "You are a collection of parasites who mistook my silence for weakness. You wanted to sleep in the master suite so badly. Well, I hope you enjoyed the mattress because tonight you will be sleeping in a motel." Jamal stepped forward, trying to puff out his chest and play the tough guy protector just like he had during our earlier argument. "Now hold on a minute." Jamal started trying to sound intimidating. "You cannot just call the cops and throw us out without notice. We have rights. We drove 4 hours to get here." The second deputy immediately rested his hand on his utility belt, shifting his stance. "Step back, sir," the deputy ordered, his voice carrying the immediate threat of physical restraint. "The legal documents have been served. The property has transferred ownership. You have 28 minutes left to gather your belongings and exit the premises. I strongly suggest you start packing." Jamal instantly deflated, backing away and raising his hands in surrender. The fake bravado completely vanished the moment real armed authority stepped into the room. Marcus was hyperventilating now. He was clutching the eviction papers to his chest, his eyes darting frantically around the foyer. He was watching his entire fabricated kingdom burn to the ground in a matter of seconds. He looked at me, a desperate, pathetic mix of rage and sheer terror in his eyes. "You cannot do this?" Naya Marcus choked out, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. "Where are we supposed to go? What about my brother? What about the money?" I smiled. It was the same slow, terrifying smile I had given him at the dining table. I took a deliberate step closer to him, lowering my voice so only he could hear the final devastating blow I was about to deliver. "What money, Marcus?" I whispered softly. "Do you mean the $250,000 you tried to steal from my equity by forging my digital signature?" Marcus stopped breathing. His eyes dilated in absolute, unadulterated horror. He realized in that precise second that I knew everything. I knew about the late-night kitchen conversation. I knew about the fake online equity loan. I knew about every single felony he had committed in the dark. I stepped back, my crimson blazer practically glowing under the foyer lights, and turned my attention to the leather portfolio Arthur Sterling was still holding. The eviction was just the opening act. It was time for the main event. "This is my house," Marcus screamed. The sound was raw, guttural, and completely devoid of the smooth, arrogant composure he had paraded around the terrace just yesterday. He aggressively waved the eviction papers in the air, the thick packet of legal documents trembling violently in his unsteady hands. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and darting wildly around the room, as if searching for a loophole that simply did not exist. "I am your husband. I am the head of this family. You cannot do this to me in front of my own mother. I will take you to court. I will take half of everything you own. This is marital property, Nia." I stood up a little taller, completely ignoring the dull, persistent throb in my healing spine. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored crimson blazer, projecting the absolute unshakable authority of a woman who had already won the war. "You all seem to share the exact same pathetic delusion," I said, my voice slicing through his hysterical outburst like a freshly sharpened blade. "Let me educate you on the reality of your situation. The LLC law in the state of Maryland is explicitly, ruthlessly clear. This penthouse was purchased by my private corporate entity 3 full years before I made the massive, regrettable mistake of marrying you. Because I never commingled a single cent of marital funds with my business accounts, my assets are completely ironclad and legally impenetrable. You own absolutely nothing here. You never contributed to the mortgage. You never paid a single property tax bill. You are nothing more than a squatter who has violently overstayed his welcome." Marcus shook his head in aggressive, panicked denial. He backed up until his spine hit the edge of the marble console table in the foyer. "You are bluffing. You cannot just sell the house and bypass me. I am on the loan documents. I submitted the paperwork myself. The bank knows who I am." I smiled a cold, terrifying smile that caused the remaining color to completely drain from his face. Ah, yes. The paperwork you submitted. Let us talk about your paperwork, Marcus. I turned slightly toward Arthur Sterling, my brilliant and relentless corporate attorney. Arthur did not say a word. He simply reached into his heavy leather portfolio and extracted a pristine, thick manila envelope. He handed it to me with a sharp, synchronized precision. I stepped forward, closing the distance between myself and the marble console table where Marcus was currently hyperventilating. I pulled two heavily stamped official documents from the envelope. I raised my arm and tossed the documents forcefully onto the table right in front of him. The camera snaps into an extreme close-up on the legal documents hitting the table. The heavy paper slaps against the polished marble surface with a definitive, aggressive thud. The lens focuses tightly on the bold, terrifying headers printed in stark black ink. One document bears the official seal of the FBI Financial Crimes Division, marked explicitly as a tip-off confirmation. The second document is a highly detailed federal bank fraud incident report, stamped with a bright red verification seal from the online equity lender. "You thought I was asleep last night," I announced, raising my voice so the sound carried clearly down the hallway, ensuring that every single parasitic member of his family heard my next words. "You thought the pain medication had incapacitated me. But I was wide awake. I watched you on the high-definition staging security cameras. I listened to you, Odessa and Brittany, standing in my kitchen plotting to steal $250,000 from my hard-earned equity." The camera executes a dynamic, violent panning motion, whipping aggressively away from the documents on the table and capturing the absolute, unadulterated terror, freezing the faces of Odessa and Jamal. The lens catches Odessa's mouth dropping open in a silent, horrified gasp, her hands flying up to clutch her chest as the devastating reality sets in. The camera continues its rapid pan to Jamal, capturing the exact second his eyes widen in pure panic. He physically stumbles backward, bumping into the wall as the realization of his brother's criminal exposure shatters his entire world. "You forged my digital signature, Marcus," I continued, my voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. "You applied for a $250,000 second mortgage through a private online equity lender. You proudly told your mother that you planned to funnel $100,000 to Jamal to save his failing commercial trucking business. You plan to pocket another $100,000 to pay off your repossessed Mercedes and your maxed-out credit cards. And you promised to send the remaining funds directly to Odessa to finance a kitchen remodel in Baltimore." Marcus tried to speak, but his vocal cords completely failed him. Only a dry, pathetic choking sound escaped his throat. He stared down at the FBI confirmation report as if it were a live, ticking, explosive device. "I did not stop the wire transfer I revealed, delivering the ultimate crushing checkmate. I deliberately let the transaction process. I let you commit the federal crime in its entirety. And the exact moment the funds were queued for deposit into the joint account, my attorney forwarded the digital forgery logs, the time-stamped security footage, and your complete unedited audio confession directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the banking authorities. That fraud report sitting on the table is the official legal confirmation that your assets are entirely frozen and a federal investigation is actively underway." Jamal turned on Marcus, the fragile illusion of their brotherly loyalty instantly vaporizing into thin air. "You forged her signature?" Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with high-pitched panic. "You told us the money was guaranteed. You swore it was a legal loan from your corporate bonus. Are you insane? You dragged us into a federal crime." Brittany grabbed Jamal's arm, her face twisted in sheer frantic desperation. She immediately began trying to save herself. "Jamal, we have absolutely nothing to do with this. We did not sign any loan documents. We did not forge anything. We need to leave this house right now before they arrest us too." Odessa leaned heavily against the hallway wall, her legs trembling so violently she looked ready to collapse onto the hardwood floor. "Marcus, tell me she is lying." Odessa breathed out, her voice quivering with a terrifying realization. "Tell me you did not commit a felony. Tell me you did not ruin your life over a bank loan." But Marcus remained completely paralyzed by the catastrophic magnitude of his own hubris. The fake billionaire persona, the arrogant frat boy host, the domineering patriarchal provider, It was all entirely dead. In his place stood a broken, terrified man staring straight down the barrel of a multi-year federal prison sentence. Arthur Sterling stepped forward, his cold professional presence reinforcing the absolute legal destruction I had just unleashed. "Mr. Henderson," Arthur stated, his tone devoid of any human sympathy, "the banking institution has flagged your accounts for severe fraudulent activity. Because the loan was initiated across state lines using a digital platform, this constitutes wire fraud. It is severe identity theft, and it is first-degree mortgage fraud. The authorities have been provided with irrefutable, crystal-clear video and audio evidence. I highly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel immediately, though, given your impending financial status, you will likely be relying on a public defender." The lead sheriff's deputy rested his hand deliberately on his utility belt, his eyes locked firmly on Marcus. "Sir, the eviction notice stands. We are not here to execute an arrest warrant for the financial crimes at this exact moment, but I can guarantee you that the federal authorities know exactly where to find you. You now have 20 minutes remaining to vacate this property. If you cause a disturbance or if you attempt to damage any of the new owner's property on your way out, I will place you under arrest for trespassing and destruction of property right here, right now." I looked at Marcus stripping away the very last remaining shred of his dignity. "You wanted to be the man of the house, Marcus. You wanted to be the ultimate unquestioned provider. You demanded that I respect your absolute authority while you stole my money and threw me out of my own bed. Well, here is your grand finale. You are homeless, you are broke, and you are about to be a convicted felon." I turned my piercing gaze toward Odessa and Jamal, letting my disgust burn through them. "And the rest of you parasitic enablers can follow him right out the door. You sat at my dining table, ate my catered food, and cheered while he plotted to ruin my life. You actively encouraged his toxic masculinity because it benefited your own greedy pockets. You thought my physical pain was your financial opportunity. Now you get to watch your golden child go to federal prison, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it." The room fell completely silent, save for the heavy, ragged breathing of the defeated family. They were entirely crushed, stripped of their arrogance, their fake wealth, and their malicious entitlement. 20 minutes, I said, my voice echoing with chilling finality. "Get out of my sight." I turned my attention directly to Brittany. She was trembling violently, her designer athletic wear suddenly looking cheap and ridiculous as she backed away from the armed deputies. "Brittany," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence like a surgical scalpel. "You complained earlier about my hospitality. You were highly offended that I did not hire a cleaning crew to carry your bags up my stairs. Well, consider this your self-service checkout. You have exactly 28 minutes left to drag all 15 of those oversized suitcases out of my house and down to the curb." Brittany gaped at me, her jaw trembling. "I cannot carry all of that by myself. Jamal has a bad shoulder. Then he'd better learn to use his good one." I snapped, my tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. "Because if a single piece of your luggage is still scuffing my hardwood floors when that timer hits 0, it goes straight into the dumpster. Move." The scene instantly shifted into pure, chaotic motion, playing out like a raw, handheld documentary. The polished stillness of my penthouse shattered into frantic, unadulterated desperation. The camera would have shaken slightly, tracking the sheer panic erupting in the foyer. Odessa let out a dramatic, wailing sob, clutching her chest, as if she were having a sudden medical emergency. The lead deputy was completely unimpressed. "Ma'am, if you are experiencing a medical event, I can call an ambulance," he stated flatly. "Otherwise, I strongly suggest you start walking." They scattered like insects exposed to a harsh spotlight. The frantic scramble was a pathetic, deeply humiliating display. Brittany and Jamal sprinted up the floating glass staircase, slipping and stumbling in their haste. They violently shoved their cheap clothes, half-empty toiletries, and stolen luxury items into their massive suitcases. I watched them drag the heavy bags down the stairs, the hard plastic wheels thumping loudly against the glass and metal, destroying their own dignity with every single panicked step. Marcus did not pack. He could not. As he reached blindly for his coat, the second deputy stepped directly in front of him. A plainclothes detective who had arrived with the property manager stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Marcus Henderson, the detective, said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "We need you to come down to the precinct for questioning regarding an active federal bank fraud investigation and interstate wire fraud." Marcus looked back at me. A pathetic, broken shell of a man. His fake billionaire persona had been completely eradicated. "Nia, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched sob. "Do not do this. I am your husband." "You are a liability," I corrected coldly. "And my corporate attorney has already filed the expedited divorce papers. Enjoy your ride." The officers placed their hands firmly on his arms, escorting him roughly out the front door. He stumbled over the threshold, his head hung low, completely stripped of his arrogant swagger. Outside, the spectacle had drawn a massive audience. The warm evening air was thick with judgment. My neighbors, the wealthy doctors, corporate lawyers, and business owners who Marcus had tried so desperately to impress, were standing on their pristine, manicured lawns. They held glasses of wine and folded their arms openly, staring at the absolute humiliation unfolding in real time. Odessa, Jamal, and Brittany struggled down the long driveway. They were sweating, panting, and dragging 15 massive suitcases across the rough pavement under the fading sunlight. One of Brittany's poorly zipped bags burst open, spilling her clothes and a stolen bottle of my expensive shampoo directly onto the asphalt. She dropped to her knees, frantically shoving her items back inside while the entire upscale neighborhood watched in deafening, judgmental silence. The fake billionaires were being officially evicted, reduced to a spectacular public display of shame and total disgrace. As they stood stranded on the curb, bickering amongst themselves, a sleek black chauffeur-driven SUV pulled silently into the driveway, gliding right past their towering pile of cheap luggage. The rear door opened, and my private medical nurse stepped out, adjusting her crisp uniform before offering me her hand. I did not look back at the sweating, panicked faces of the people who had tried to break me. I simply stepped into the plush, climate-controlled interior of my waiting vehicle. The camera begins a slow, steady pullback shot, capturing the ultimate contrast of the evening. The wealthy, independent owner riding away in absolute comfort, while the parasitic family is left standing on the asphalt, surrounded by the wreckage of their own greed. The scene transitions with a smooth cinematic fade, opening on the breathtaking interior of my new luxury recovery penthouse. The space is a flawless sanctuary of imported marble floor-to-ceiling glass and absolute deafening silence. I stood by the massive windows overlooking the glittering city skyline, my medical brace securely hidden beneath my emerald silk robe. I reached out and poured myself a heavy crystal glass of vintage red wine. The camera executes a smooth, slow push and tracking steadily toward my face as I take a slow, deliberate sip. I lower the glass and look directly into the lens, my eyes burning with absolute triumphant clarity. "Family is not a free pass to exploit your hard work," I said, my voice smooth and lethal. "Society will tell you to shrink yourself, to endure abuse, to drain your own blood, just to keep a fragile man comfortable. But your peace of mind is your most valuable asset. Do not ever let anyone use tradition or guilt to turn your empire into their personal ATM. Sometimes the absolute best way to clean your house is to pack up all the trash and sell the entire building." The camera pushes in tight on my sharp, victorious smile before executing a hard, sudden fade to black.